There was once a man who made the kings of Europe lose sleep simply by hearing that he had gone to war. There was once a man who placed the crown upon his own head inside Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, as though all of history itself had to bow before his will. There was once a man who led armies across high mountains, plains, great rivers, and imperial capitals until the name Napoleon Bonaparte became the terror of an entire age. But in the end, that man did not die upon a throne. He did not die amid the sound of trumpets proclaiming victory. Nor did he die in the arms of France, the country he had once loved, once glorified, and also once exhausted. On the 5th day of May, 1821, Napoleon died on the island of Saint Helena in the distant Atlantic Ocean, inside the damp house of Longwood, guarded by the very enemies who had once defeated him. A man who had once redrawn the map of Europe ended his life without even the freedom to step beyond the boundaries of an island. So who truly was Napoleon? A military genius born to change the world? A reformer who left a lasting imprint on modern law? Or a conqueror who went too far until his own ambition became his final sentence? Such a life cannot be told in only light or darkness. For Napoleon was both the flame that lit the path toward a new France and the flame that set all of Europe ablaze in war. And perhaps his greatest tragedy was not his defeat at Waterloo, but the fact that he had won too much, too soon, until he forgot that even genius cannot stand above the limits of history. This video does not tell the story of Napoleon Bonaparte as a name already sealed within the frame of history books. We will go back to his beginning, when Napoleon was not yet an emperor, when there was no Austerlitz, no Waterloo, no Saint Helena, when he was only a boy born on the island of Corsica, carrying within himself the insecurity of someone standing on the margins of France, speaking French imperfectly, mocked by his classmates, yet quietly nurturing a will greater than the destiny others seemed to have already assigned to him. From that lonely childhood, Napoleon entered the French army at a time when the entire nation was shaking under the force of the revolution. In an age when old thrones collapsed, old orders cracked apart, and people not born into power suddenly had the chance to rise through talent, Napoleon found the doorway of his life. He had no royal blood. He had no great family standing behind him. What he possessed was the cold, sharp mind of an artillery officer, a hunger to be recognized, and an instinct for seizing opportunity whenever history opened even the narrowest gap. Toulon brought his name out of the shadows. The Italian campaign turned him into a hero of France. Egypt revealed that within him there was not only military genius, but also an oriental dream, imperial ambition, and darker regions that cannot easily be ignored. Then, when France had grown weary of disorder, when the Directory had weakened and the people longed for a strong hand, Napoleon returned to Paris and passed through the final doorway, moving from a general into the man who would seize the destiny of the nation. This is the first part in the journey of Napoleon Bonaparte. Not the story of an emperor whose fate had already reached its conclusion, but the story of how a man once looked down upon rose upward, step by step, turning wounds into ambition, battlefields into stairways, and revolutionary France into the greatest stage of his life. Before becoming the emperor whose every step made all of Europe watch closely, Napoleon Bonaparte was once a small child on the island of Corsica, where the blue waters of the Mediterranean surrounded dry mountains, ancient villages, and a national spirit that had never easily submitted. He was born at the Casa Buonaparte residence in the town of Ajaccio on the 15th day of August, 1769. At that time, Corsica had only recently come under French control. And so, from the very moment he opened his eyes to the world, Napoleon stood upon a fragile boundary, born on Corsican soil, carrying Corsican blood and memory, yet swept by fate into the machinery of France. The Bonaparte family did not belong to the impoverished classes. They were minor nobility of Italian origin, enough to preserve a measure of dignity within local society, but not great enough to enter the true ranks of Europe's powerful aristocracy. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who had once been appointed as Corsica's representative before the court of King Louis XVI. He was the image of a father who knew how to adapt to the times, how to bow before political reality in order to find a path for his family. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, by contrast, was a strong and severe woman, one who endured many upheavals and kept her children under a discipline that was almost iron hard. Later, when looking back on Napoleon's life, one can glimpse in him the influence of both, the political shrewdness of his father and the enduring, austere will of his mother. Napoleon was the second child in a large family. Above him was Joseph. After him came Lucien, Elisa, Louis, Pauline, Caroline, and Jerome. In that household, childhood was not filled only with the voices and laughter of siblings, but also with the pressure of survival felt by a minor noble family seeking its place on an island that had only recently changed masters. A child born into such circumstances often learns very early that status is not something naturally given. It must be preserved, it must be proven, and at times it must be reclaimed with all one's strength. In January of 1779, when he was not yet 10 years old, Napoleon was sent to mainland France to study at a religious school in Autun. It was not merely a journey for education. It was the first time a Corsican child was separated from his island in order to step into the vast world of France, a world far colder and more unfamiliar. At Autun, the first thing he had to learn was not tactics, not mathematics, and not yet the art of war. The first thing he had to learn was French, a new language, a new rhythm, a new way of existing. For many other children, this might have been only a matter of schooling. For Napoleon, it was the feeling of being forced to leave behind his familiar shell in order to put on an identity that did not yet fully belong to him. By May of that same year, Napoleon was admitted to the military academy at Brienne-le-Château. There, his sense of alienation became even clearer. Among French students, the Corsican boy spoke with a different accent, pronounced words differently, and could not even spell French perfectly. These things made him the target of mockery from his classmates. But there are wounds that do not bring a person down. Quietly, they turn inward and become a cold, silent, and persistent form of willpower. Napoleon was not the kind of person who easily dissolved into the crowd. Mocked by others, he withdrew even more deeply into books, into mathematics, history, geography, and into worlds where intellect could make up for the feeling of being looked down upon. At Brienne, Napoleon did not stand out as a likable boy. He was not someone who made others love him at first sight, but he made people take notice because of his unusual concentration. One supervisor once remarked that he was very attentive to mathematics and fairly solid in history and geography. At first glance, such a remark may sound ordinary, but when viewed from the whole of his later life, it appears almost like an early sign. Mathematics trained Napoleon in precise calculation. History gave him a sense of destiny and power. Geography helped him see the world not merely through emotion, but through maps, distances, lines of march, and strategic positions. A child mocked by his classmates for his accent was, in silence, preparing himself in the language of the battlefield. In 1784, after completing his studies at Brienne, Napoleon was admitted to the École Militaire in Paris, one of France's prestigious military schools. For a teenager of Corsican origin, this was a very great step. Paris was no longer a small town, nor the enclosed grounds of a school. Paris was the center of the kingdom, where all the brilliance and all the injustices of the old society appeared clearly together. There, Napoleon was trained to become an artillery officer. At first, he had once aspired to a naval career, but that path closed, opening instead another direction that seemed quieter, drier, yet more suited to his mind. Artillery, a weapon that required calculation, calmness, and cold precision. During this same period, the death of his father made the family's situation more difficult. Income declined, and pressure fell upon the shoulders of the young son. Napoleon was forced to complete a program that normally lasted 2 years in only 1 year. Behind that detail lay not only intelligence. It was also the pressure of someone who understood that he did not have the right to live leisurely like those born with everything already in hand. While many people his age were still trying to find recognition, Napoleon had already learned how to run faster than his circumstances. In September of 1785, he graduated and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the La Fère Artillery Regiment. At that time, Napoleon was only a very young officer in the French Royal Army. No one could have known that this second lieutenant would one day shake the thrones of many dynasties. But if one listens closely to those early years, something unusual can already be detected in him. The pride of a wounded man, the discipline of a child forged in severity, the mind of an artillery student, and the quiet ambition of someone standing between two identities, not fully belonging to the place where he was born, and not yet truly accepted by the place he served. Perhaps it was precisely this sense of not belonging that created Napoleon. For when a person has no firm place in the world, he will either be made smaller by that world, or he will try to expand the world until there is enough room for him. Napoleon chose the second path. From a lonely Corsican boy in the schoolyard of Brienne, he began to enter the French army with a quiet yet dangerous state of mind. He had to rise. He had to be recognized. He had to prove that a peripheral origin could not decide the limits of a human life. But the France that Napoleon had just entered was also quietly transforming. Behind the gates of the military school, behind the royal court and its aging rituals, a great storm was gathering. Only a few years later, the French Revolution would erupt, and that very storm would open for the young Corsican officer a path that, under the old order, he might never have had. When Napoleon entered military life, France still bore the appearance of an old kingdom, where status, lineage, and privilege often determined a person's fate even before talent could speak. For a young officer of Corsican origin, born into a minor noble family, but not among the powerful, the path of advancement within that order was by no means wide open. He could serve, he could strive, he could prove his ability, but to go truly far, to break beyond the limits that the old society had already set for him, was almost impossible. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Doors that had seemed tightly shut for generations began to tremble. The court of Versailles was no longer an untouchable center. Slogans of liberty, equality, and citizenship spread through the streets, slipped into barracks, passed across the countryside, and made all of France seem to awaken in a great fever. To many people, it was chaos. To those born on the margins of power, it was an opportunity without precedent. For when the old order cracked apart, talent could push its way into the gaps that lineage had once sealed shut. Napoleon did not stand outside that storm. He supported the French Revolution, yet within him still weighed heavily the question of Corsica, of homeland, of a small people swallowed by a history larger than themselves. In May of 1789, he once wrote to Pasquale Paoli, the man regarded as a symbol of Corsican nationalism, in a voice filled with pain, saying that he had been born when his nation was declining. Those were not the words of someone indifferent to his homeland. On the contrary, within those lines lay the ache of a young man who understood that he was living between two loyalties. On one side, Corsica of memory and blood. On the other, France, which was opening for him the path of the future. In the early years of the Revolution, Napoleon returned to Corsica many times. There, he was not merely a young officer searching for opportunity, but also a son who wished to take part in the destiny of the island where he had been born. But Corsica at that time was not peaceful. The island was pulled into a complex conflict among royalists, revolutionaries, and Corsican nationalists. Each faction spoke of the future, but those futures were not the same. Some wanted to preserve the old order, some wanted to follow the French Revolution, and some wanted Corsica to break away from the influence of Paris. In such an atmosphere, every choice carried a price. Napoleon leaned toward the revolution. He supported the Jacobins, received the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Corsican militia, and commanded a battalion of volunteers. At a very young age, he had already begun to taste something that would follow him throughout his life. Politics and the military could never be separated. An order on the battlefield could carry political consequences. A political choice could push a person into the mouth of a gun. For Napoleon, the revolution was no longer a set of distant slogans in Paris. It had entered his own homeland, dividing people who had once spoken the same language, looked upon the same sea, and carried within themselves the same Corsican pride. In July of 1792, although he had overstayed his leave and had once been involved in a riot against French troops in Corsica, Napoleon was still promoted to captain in the regular French army. That detail shows how the times had changed. Under the old order, Such a blemish might have stopped a career in its tracks. In the whirlwind of the revolution, ability and military necessity sometimes mattered more than a spotless record. France needed men who knew how to bear arms, how to calculate, how to act quickly amid disorder. Napoleon, with the cold, sharp mind of an artillery officer, began to become the kind of man the new age could use. But in Corsica, the conflict grew deeper and deeper. Pasquale Paoli, who had once been a great figure in the mind of the young Napoleon, gradually followed the path of separating Corsica from France. The difference between them was no longer a small disagreement. It was a division of fate. Paoli looked toward a Corsica independent from French power. Napoleon, after many inner struggles, increasingly placed his future in revolutionary France. When Paoli sabotaged a French attack on the island of Sardinia, where Bonaparte was one of the principal commanders, the final fracture became almost impossible to mend. In June of 1793, the Bonaparte family had to leave Corsica, abandoning behind them their homeland, old relationships, and even a part of the identity that had once been bound to them by blood. It was not a glorious departure. It was more like a flight. A family was swept away from its island by the very political vortex they had once hoped they could master. For Napoleon, that moment was perhaps more painful than people usually imagine. For from this point onward, he no longer stood between Corsica and France in the old sense. He had lost the anchor of homeland, and that very loss pushed him deeper into the fate of France. There are paths in history that do not open with cheers, but with the sound of a door closing behind one's back. Napoleon left Corsica not as a victor, but as a man forced to choose. Yet sometimes it is precisely a choice made in pain that creates destiny. Revolutionary France, with all its disorder, violence, and opportunity, became the only stage left for that young officer. From here on, Napoleon was no longer merely the Corsican schoolboy trying to prove himself among the French. He began to become a soldier of the revolution, a man whom a chaotic age would test, use, and then raise up very quickly. And only a short time after that departure from his homeland, in a port city sinking into smoke and fire, the name Bonaparte would be called out loudly by history for the first time: Toulon. After leaving Corsica, Napoleon entered France not with the appearance of a man who had found glory, but with the state of mind of someone who had just lost a part of his homeland. Yet history often does not wait for people to regain their composure. Revolutionary France was being torn apart from many sides. Outside, the monarchies of Europe were trying to strangle the young revolution. Inside, there were uprisings, purges, divisions, and fear. Amid that chaos, a young artillery officer could be forgotten very quickly. Yet in that same chaos, if he could see the right moment, place the right cannon, and dare to take responsibility, that man could step into history. In 1793, Toulon became a great wound of the Republic. The important port city in southern France rose up against the revolutionary government and was occupied by British forces. To Paris, Toulon was not merely a rebellious city. It was a strategic doorway open to the enemy upon the very body of France. If Toulon were lost, the Republic would lose not only a harbor, but also its honor, its security, and its confidence that it still had the strength to defend itself while surrounded by the old Europe. Napoleon at that time was not yet a great commander. He was only a young officer, yet he possessed exactly what the situation required: the eye of an artilleryman. While many people saw Toulon as a city that had to be stormed directly, Napoleon saw that the key lay in the heights capable of controlling the harbor. If the proper artillery positions could be seized, the British warships in the harbor would no longer have a safe place of refuge. He understood that some battles did not need to begin with loud cries of attack. One only had to place the cannons in the right positions, and the entire situation could turn. That plan was not romantic, nor beautiful in the ordinary sense. It was cold, precise, and practical. But that very precision was what made Napoleon. During the decisive assault, he was wounded in the thigh, a wound not as great as the things history would later attach to his name, but enough to remind us that his first glory did not come from afar, nor through words of praise, but amid gun smoke and real pain. When the key positions were seized, the British fleet was forced to withdraw, and Toulon was retaken. The young officer Bonaparte suddenly drew attention. After that achievement, he was promoted to brigadier general at only 24 years old. That was the first turning point. But that turning point also revealed a very deep truth about Napoleon's age. The French Revolution could devour a person in a single day, yet it could also lift an unknown man very high after only one battle. Toulon gave Napoleon the chance to be seen, and Napoleon, through his own talent, made sure that chance did not pass in vain. From this point onward, he was no longer merely the soldier driven out of Corsica, but a name beginning to be remembered within the military machinery of the Republic. Even so, in the age of the Revolution, no glory was entirely secure. In July of 1794, the Thermidorian reaction brought down the Jacobin government. Those who had once been close to the Jacobins were suspected, purged, and pulled into a dangerous vortex. Napoleon, too, was placed under house arrest in Nice because of his connection with the Robespierre brothers. Only a short time earlier, he had been the young general praised after Toulon. Now, that same revolution could turn him into a suspect. In an age when politics changed color faster than the weather, talent was not enough to protect a person's fate. He was released after about 2 weeks. That incident did not end Napoleon's career, but it surely left in him a bitter lesson. In politics, standing close to power is both an opportunity and a danger. A man who wishes to survive needs not only courage on the battlefield, but also the ability to know where the times are leaning. After Thermidor, Napoleon at times fell into uncertainty. He was once assigned to the Army of the West to take part in the war in the Vendée, an infantry duty that did not suit his artillery expertise. He refused on the grounds of poor health and was removed from the list of generals in the regular army on the 15th day of September, 1795. The fame that had followed Toulon seemed as if it could vanish. A man whose name history had called for the first time now stood before the danger of being forgotten by history. Then Paris shook again. On the 13th of Vendémiaire, year 4, according to the French Revolutionary calendar, that is, the 5th day of October, 1795, Royalist forces rose up against the National Convention. The revolutionary government was threatened at the very center of power. Paul Barras, knowing Napoleon's ability at Toulon, entrusted him with the task of commanding the forces defending the National Convention at the Tuileries Palace. This was no longer a battlefield far from the capital. This was Paris. This was naked politics. This was the moment when a trembling government had to turn to a man who knew how to use cannons in order to preserve its own life. Napoleon understood very clearly what had to be done. He ordered the young cavalry officer Joachim Murat to seize the large cannons. When the insurgents advanced, artillery was used to drive them back. Blood was spilled on the streets of Paris. The uprising was crushed. For the Royalists, it was a bitter day. For the revolutionary government, it was a moment of escape from danger. For Napoleon, it was a moment of destiny. He had proven not only that he could win on the battlefield, but that he could also save a regime in its hour of peril. After the 13th of Vendémiaire, Napoleon's path opened wider than ever before. He was promoted to lieutenant general, appointed commander of the Army of the Interior, and later given command of the Army of Italy. The name Bonaparte began to move beyond the sphere of a talented officer and step into the light of national power. From Toulon to Paris, from the heights controlling a harbor to the cannons on the streets of the capital, Napoleon had learned a truth he would never forget. In unstable times, the man who can impose order through force will be granted power by others. But that power was not yet a throne. It was only a doorway. Behind Napoleon stood a France exhausted by revolution. Before him lay Italy, where a deprived army was waiting for a commander bold enough to turn hunger, cold, fatigue, and doubt into victory. And from that campaign onward, Napoleon would no longer be merely the man who had saved Paris. He would begin to become the living legend of all France. On the 9th day of March, 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte married Josephine de Beauharnais. It was a marriage that was both romantic and tinged with the politics of revolutionary Paris. Josephine was older than he was, had passed through ruin and loss, and possessed deep connections within the new circles of power. To Napoleon, this woman was not only an intense love. She was also like a doorway that brought him closer to the upper society of post-revolutionary France, where people spoke of Republican ideals while quietly calculating power, position, and influence. Only 2 days after the wedding, Napoleon left Paris to take command of the Army of Italy. There was almost no time for the distance between private happiness and the call of the battlefield to settle. A young husband, newly married, had to set out at once, carrying in his heart a burning love. In his mind, bold military plans, and before his eyes, a tired, deprived army that few believed could achieve anything great. Yet it was precisely in such circumstances that Napoleon's character began to reveal itself most clearly. He did not receive a perfect army. He received an army that was hungry, ragged, and losing faith, then breathed into it the feeling that they were not merely going to fight battles, but were stepping into a page of history. The Italian battlefield at that time was not a promenade. Before Napoleon stood the Austrian army and its Italian allies, as well as mountains, valleys, fortresses, and tangled lines of defense. France needed victory, but it did not have enough abundance to give the young general everything he wanted. Therefore, Napoleon had to use what he possessed most: speed, calculation, and the ability to strike at the enemy's weak point before they could understand what was happening. He separated hostile forces, forced them to be unable to coordinate effectively, then threw his troops into places of decisive importance. To him, war was not merely strength. War was rhythm, opportunity, the moment when one side still hesitated while the other had already struck. The Battle of Lodi in 1796 became a special milestone in Napoleon's own consciousness. Militarily, it was a victory that helped him consolidate the initiative against the Austrians in northern Italy. But spiritually, Lodi was even more important than that. It is often said that here, Napoleon began to believe deeply that he had been born for an extraordinary role. The image of the young general at the bridge, amid gun smoke, cannon fire, and shouting, quickly became the material of legend. The soldiers saw in him a leader who dared to stand close to danger. Napoleon, in turn, saw in himself a destiny opening very quickly. After Lodi, successive victories caused his fame to spread widely. At Arcole, Napoleon continued to turn the battlefield into an image of symbolism. The later painting of him holding a flag on the bridge at Arcole may have been idealized, but it reflected very accurately something Napoleon understood better than many other generals. In modern war, image is also a weapon. A general does not merely need to win. He must also make his soldiers believe that victory bears his face. He must turn his presence into faith and his name into a call to march. In March of 1797, Napoleon led his army into Austria, forcing the enemy to negotiate. The Treaty of Leoben was signed that year, opening the way for greater agreements afterward. When the campaign ended with the Treaty of Campo Formio on the 17th day of October, 1797, France gained important benefits, and Napoleon returned not merely as a victorious general, but as a national hero. He was not yet 30 years old, but he had already made Paris speak his name in a different tone. He was no longer the Bonaparte of Toulon, no longer merely the man who used cannons to save the National Convention. Now he was the general who had changed the balance of power in Italy, forced Austria to sit at the negotiating table, and brought military glory back to a France hungry for pride. Yet behind those cheers lay something worth contemplating. In Italy, Napoleon did not only learn how to win battles, he learned how to govern conquered territories, how to negotiate with governments, how to send spoils back to France, how to use the press to build his image, and how to make the public in Paris see him as a symbol of new strength. He established newspapers for the army, while also creating channels of information directed toward France. From this point onward, the legend of Napoleon was no longer written only through military reports. It was nourished by letters, news, paintings, and stories of a young general who brought victory wherever he went. At this point, Napoleon began to differ from many generals of his time. Others might win a battle and then wait for the court or the government to recognize them. Napoleon understood that the age had changed. The public was a new battlefield. Reputation was a political force. Whoever could control the story told about himself could go farther than his own victories. Therefore, the Italian campaign did not merely produce a renowned commander. It produced a political figure growing faster than the framework that the Republic could easily control. Also in Italy, another aspect of Napoleon's character became clearer: the mixture of revolutionary ideals and the possessive instinct of a conqueror. He acted in the name of liberating lands from the old order, but the French army also took spoils, property, works of art, and political influence. The ancient cities of Italy saw in him both a representative of the new France and a military force, compelling them to submit. Glory, therefore, was never entirely pure. It always carried the shadow of power behind it. When Napoleon returned to Paris in December of 1797, he was no longer the uncertain officer he had been after Thermidor. In the eyes of the public, he was a hero. In the eyes of politicians, he was a precious asset, but also a quiet source of anxiety. A general loved by his soldiers, acclaimed by the people, capable of fighting battles, negotiating, shaping his own image, and still too young to stop. This was something every government both needed and feared. The Italian campaign had carried Napoleon from the light of military achievement into the light of legend. But the greater the legend, the harder it was for ambition to remain still. After shaking northern Italy, Napoleon did not want to stand only upon the familiar battlefields of Europe. His vision began to turn farther away, toward the east, toward Egypt, toward a dream colored by science and filled with imperial ambition. After his resounding victories in Italy, Napoleon Bonaparte stood before a very strange paradox of power. When a person has moved too quickly along one path, he often no longer wishes to stop where others think enough has already been reached. France saw him as a young hero. The army saw him as the general who could turn deprivation into glory. The politicians in Paris both needed him and quietly feared a reputation growing faster than the Republic itself. In that atmosphere, Napoleon turned his eyes toward the east, not only as a new battlefield, but as a wider stage for his imagination and ambition. In 1798, instead of confronting Britain directly at sea, something the French Navy could not reliably guarantee, Napoleon proposed another direction: strike Egypt, and from there threaten Britain's trade route to India. It was a plan both bold and dangerous. In his eyes, Egypt was not merely the land of pyramids, deserts, and ancient civilizations. It was also a strategic position, an imagined bridge connecting Europe with the East, a place where a young general could turn war into an adventure colored by world history. In May of 1798, Napoleon set out. With him went not only soldiers, cannons, and warships, but also a group of scientists, engineers, painters, mathematicians, naturalists, and surveyors. The number commonly recorded is 167 people. That detail made the Egyptian expedition unusual. It did not carry only the appearance of a military campaign. It was also clothed in the garment of knowledge, of the Enlightenment, of the desire to measure, record, and decipher an ancient civilization. Later, the Rosetta Stone would be discovered in the context of that expedition, and the monumental work on Egypt published in the early 19th century would cause the East to appear before Europe with a fascination that was both scientific and mysterious. On the way to Egypt, on the 9th day of June, 1798, Napoleon seized Malta from the Order of the Knights Hospitaller. It was a swift victory with little loss, giving the French an important position in the Mediterranean. But behind that efficiency lay a familiar sign in Napoleon's character. He always looked at the map as a chain of footholds to be seized before reaching a larger objective. To him, every island, every harbor, every route could become a step on the ladder of ambition. On the first day of July, 1798, the French army landed at Alexandria. From here, the Eastern dream touched hot sand, thirst, disease, and the unfamiliar distance of a world that would not easily submit. Napoleon marched inland and faced the Mamluk forces. On the 21st day of July, 1798, the Battle of the Pyramids took place near Cairo. Using defensive square formations, the French resisted the Mamluk cavalry and won a major victory. On the sands of Egypt, before the shadows of ancient structures that had stood there for thousands of years, Napoleon once again proved his tactical genius. But victory on land could not conceal the danger at sea. On the first day of August, 1798, the British fleet under Horatio Nelson defeated almost the entire French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. It was a devastating blow to the whole expedition. Napoleon's army was still in Egypt, still able to win battles, still able to occupy territory, but its connection to France had been almost severed. An army once brought to the east by great ambition now faced the danger of becoming men left behind between desert and sea. From that moment, the Egyptian campaign began to reveal its darker side. The glamour of science could not erase the harshness of war. French soldiers, accustomed to the mountains and plains of Europe, had to endure heat, disease, deprivation, and resistance from a foreign land. The French army may have brought scholars to measure the pyramids, but it also brought swords and guns, occupation, and imposition. History, therefore, cannot tell this expedition only as a journey of knowledge. It was also a conquest, and conquest always leaves wounds. At the beginning of 1799, Napoleon led his forces into the Syrian territories of the Ottoman Empire, capturing Arish, Gaza, Jaffa, and Haifa. In the assault on Jaffa, war revealed its most ruthless face. After the city fell, many prisoners were executed. This was one of the great dark stains in Napoleon's career, a moment that makes it impossible to see him only in the light of genius. For there, under the pressure of military necessity, disease, lack of food, and fear of counterattack, the commander's decision was no longer a heroic line drawn upon a map, but the real lives of real human beings. Then came Acre. Before that fortress, Napoleon was stopped. His army was weakened by disease, short of supplies, and unable to take the stronghold. The dream of advancing deeper into the east began to close. In May of 1799, he withdrew to Egypt. The soldiers who had followed him across deserts, ruined cities, sickness, and exhaustion began to understand that not every campaign of Napoleon ended in blazing glory as in Italy. There were lands that refused to become steps beneath a legend. There were distances so vast that even talent could not fully bridge them. On the 25th day of July, 1799, Napoleon defeated an Ottoman landing at the Battle of Aboukir. It was a victory that helped him recover some of his military radiance. But the overall situation had changed. In Europe, France was facing new difficulties. News from home, though irregular, showed him that the political stage in Paris was once again opening a dangerous opportunity. On the 24th day of August, 1799, Napoleon left Egypt and returned to France, leaving the army under the command of General Jean-Baptiste Kleber. That departure would remain controversial for a long time afterward. To his supporters, it was the decision of a statesman who saw that France needed him. To his critics, it was the abandonment of an army in a distant land after the Eastern dream had ceased to be favorable. Viewed either way, Egypt revealed a far more complex Napoleon, a man fascinated by science yet unafraid of conquest, a bold military commander who could calculate coldly, a symbol of European intellect and at the same time an embodiment of imperial ambition. Napoleon left Egypt not as a man who had completed his Eastern dream. He left because he understood that real power was waiting for him in Paris. The pyramids remained standing in the desert. The soldiers remained there with their uncertain fate. And the young general returned to France, where a weary, weak government that had lost the people's confidence was moving toward collapse. From the hot sands of Egypt to the corridors of power in Paris, Napoleon was about to make the greatest transition of his life, from conqueror on the battlefield to the man who would seize the destiny of an entire nation. When Napoleon set foot again in France in October of 1799, he did not return as a man who had completed a campaign in full. Egypt still lay unresolved behind him. The expeditionary army had not yet escaped its uncertain fate. But Paris at that time was opening a power vacuum larger than any battlefield. After many years of revolution, the Republic was exhausted, divided, and directionless. The Directory still existed in name, but in the eyes of many French people, it had become a symbol of helplessness, corruption, and disorder. The people needed bread, needed order, needed the feeling that France would not continue drifting among factions and old promises. Napoleon very quickly understood that atmosphere. He was not the only one who saw the weakness of the government, but he was the one with enough military fame to turn that weakness into opportunity. After Italy, his name carried special weight. After Egypt, although the campaign remained controversial, his image among the French public had not collapsed. People still saw in Bonaparte a man of action, someone who seemed to know what had to be done when others only debated. At a moment when society was too tired of chaos, sometimes a single decisive posture was enough to make the crowd believe that it was the future. Those who wanted to change the regime came to Napoleon. Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, one of the influential figures of the Directory, needed a sword strong enough to carry out his plan to overthrow the weakening constitutional government. Around that movement were other important names such as Roger Ducos, Joseph Fouché, Talleyrand, and Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger brother, who was then president of the Council of 500. This was no longer a battle with clear formations on two sides. This was the battlefield of corridors, decrees, rumors, fear, and handshakes in the dark. On the 9th day of November, 1799, that is, the 18th of Brumaire, year 8, according to the French Republican calendar, the plan was set in motion. The two legislative chambers were persuaded to leave Paris for the Château de Saint-Cloud on the grounds that there was a threat of Jacobin uprising. Napoleon was given the task of ensuring security. At first hearing, everything seemed like a defensive measure for the Republic. But behind that legal shell was a carefully calculated transfer of power. The man who had once saved the government with cannons in Paris was no longer merely standing outside to protect it. He was stepping inside, where real power was being rewritten. The next day, tension erupted at St. Cloud. The deputies began to realize that they had not merely been moved to avoid danger, but were being placed before a coup. Napoleon entered amid protest, confusion, and suspicion. That moment was by no means as glorious as later propaganda paintings would suggest. He faltered, was questioned, was attacked, and at times the situation even became dangerous. The man who had once remained calm before the fire of battle now had to face another kind of resistance, the resistance of those who spoke in the name of law and the Republic. Lucien Bonaparte's role at that moment became decisive. Through his position in the Council of 500, Lucien helped turn the situation around and created the pretext for the army to intervene. In the end, soldiers were brought in. The council was dissolved. A reduced legislative body then appointed Napoleon, Sieyès, and Ducos as the three provisional consuls. On paper, the Republic had not yet disappeared. The titles were still there. The language of stability, reform, and national salvation was still being used. But after the 18th of Brumaire, real power had changed hands. What is worth reflecting on is that Napoleon did not rise by declaring himself against the revolution. He did not speak in the name of the Bourbon line, nor did he call for a return to the old order. He entered the political center using the very language of the revolution, saving the Republic, ending chaos, and protecting the achievements already won. That is what makes this moment both profound and dangerous. A revolution can give birth to freedom, but when freedom comes with too much blood, too much hunger, and too much instability, the people begin to long for a strong hand. Napoleon appeared precisely when that longing had become greater than the fear of being ruled. After the coup, the Constitution of the year 8 was drafted, and Napoleon quickly rose above those who had once thought they could use him. Sieyès wanted a new political structure, but Bonaparte was the one who truly grasped the power of the moment. He became first consul and moved into the Tuileries Palace, a place once associated with French monarchical power. That image contains an unforgettable paradox. The child of the revolution stepped into the space of the old kings, not to restore the past, but to build a new form of power in the name of order. From this point onward, Napoleon was no longer merely the general acclaimed after victory. In reality, he became the head of France. The sword had entered the office. The battlefield had become the state. His orders no longer moved only regiments and cannons, but began to touch law, administration, finance, religion, education, and the lives of millions of citizens. This caused the story of Napoleon to enter another depth. If war had revealed his talent for defeating enemies, the consulate would reveal his greater ambition, to reorganize an exhausted nation. And it was precisely during those years, between France's need for stability and Napoleon's will to control, that a legacy more enduring than many victories began to take shape. After the gunfire and the coups, he would step into the role of a reformer, where power was measured not only by conquered territory, but by laws, institutions, and an order that would remain long after the battlefields had fallen silent. Napoleon had gone from the island of Corsica to the center of power in France. But the power he had just seized was still not the final summit. For in that man, the title of consul never seemed to be a stopping point. Ahead of him lay law, order, a crown, and the dream of an empire that would make all of Europe tremble.